So you asked me how I got to Costa Rica. So it'd be a fun way to start this podcast. I've never started this one with this story. So when I was 21, I dropped out of college because I almost failed an art class. And I was like, this is stupid. I'm leaving. I'm not doing this. And I was working online as a writer at the time. So I started looking for it's like cheap places to go around the world because I'd never traveled at all. I was born in Northwest Georgia. Other than going to Florida, I had basically never been more than like 50 miles from my house. So I was like, I'm going to travel. My parents hated that idea. They started crying. They told me they'd like cry themselves to sleep every night, that kind of stuff. So they didn't like that. But I was like, I am just going to leave states, leave what I know, and just go travel. So didn't have a lot of money because I was 21, broke, college student. And I just started looking for like really cheap places with a nice view. And I found this tiny little hole in the wall in Costa Rica on Airbnb. It was like $300 a month or, whatever. I joked that it was so small. When I went to sleep, my head was in the bedroom and my feet were in the kitchen. It was true. I remember I shared it with like cockroaches and I showed it to a friend one time and they're like, you should not live here. Like, this is insane. But it had an amazing view of this lake with like mountains behind it. And pretty much every day I could see like birds or sloths or monkeys or all this stuff. So I just fell in love. And then I just kind of kept going back and ended up buying a place there. Took my parents back. They loved it. So I bought a place there. So that was how that got started.
It's wild. We have a similar story. Like I grew up in a ultra-Orthodox kind of Jewish world, number 2 of 10, but I also never traveled. Like size of the family, parents did not have a lot of money. First time I got on a plane, I was 14. Went to my first ever flight was actually to, I believe it was Denver, for like a summer camp, and then Iowa, and then like a bunch of other random kind of like flyover states. Drove across the country a few times in summer with my older brother. Like we would do a road trip from Jersey to like Phoenix or Jersey to Salt Lake or Jersey to LA and then like fly back. First time I left the country, I was 20 years old and I think I had like $800 in my bank account when I left the country, but I had like a few million miles from credit card points. And I spent my early 20s, dropped out of high school, didn't go to college, spent my early 20s traveling the world with like a ton of points and $0. So I was like staying at these 5-star hotels, being like absolutely broke in the bank. So like couldn't really afford food, but kind of like staying in a 5-star hotel, eating in the lounge. And kind of spent my early 20s just midlife crisising at 20. Before finding e-com. Like e-commerce was just the thing that you can, as long as you can show that you can do something, almost anyone was willing to hire you. Yes, like my first job, I was making like $30,000 a year for a couple of years, but it was a way to get in. It took me like an additional 10 years to get to Costa Rica. So you're probably like 10 years ahead of me.
Oh, no, not at all. Probably 20 years behind as far as career progress. But
insane.
And then what's the story of how you ended up at Yotpo where you are right now?
So kind of catch you up quickly. Spent a couple of years at this luggage company based in Tel Aviv. Was living in Tel Aviv area for like 4 years, 2014, 2018. Spent 2 years as a degenerate, just traveling, like based out of Tel Aviv, traveling to Europe. 2016, I got that job there after doing a bunch of I would basically spend 6 months in Tel Aviv, come back to the US, work for some like my cousin's uncle's company for like a month, make $5,000 and go back. And I was living on nothing. I was sharing with a bunch of roommates. My first like real job that wasn't like a 6-week kind of like summer stint was in 2016. Like I'm not that long in the, it's like basically 10 years since I had like my first like big boy job, and it was customer service. So kind of like $30,000 a year. Started as customer service. It was really everything. Like I was the only native English speaker. So it was like a Kickstarter campaign that was years delayed. So I was doing customer service. I was doing email marketing. I picked up Amazon ads. I was doing like the whole Amazon listings, ops and logistics to like 64 countries with 3 different warehouses, investor relations, trade shows, literally everything outside of finance and like meta ads, which we weren't really running at the point. Finance design, like those were the 2 things I didn't touch. Spent 4 years there. While I was there, started a startup that failed. Moved back to the US in 2018. Still stayed at that luggage company remote until 2020, which again, like at that point, maybe $60,000 in salary. 2020, I got a job smack down in COVID at a company called Nugs. They were like very, very much like the it startup at that point, raised a ton of money, a 20-year-old CEO, kind of like a bizarre story. Was there for a couple of weeks until I realized like culture wise it was so not a fit. Like it was so great for some people. I'm like, I work really hard, but I hate the idea of being told what to do and when to do it and how to do it. And the idea of like being in office 6 days a week and like not leaving before 8 p.m. when I'm like, I'd rather just be working from Zion National Park with my laptop. So I basically left after like 6 weeks. And somehow through a friend of a friend, I had been sharing stuff on Twitter. I built like an audience of a couple of maybe 1,000, 2,000 people at that point in time talking about CX, and somebody connected me to Ollipop. And this is 2020. Ollipop was super small. I think I was number 16 there. We went from a couple of million in revenue in mostly Erewhon, Sprouts, and Northern California to a $75 million business, 70 something employees, all in the span of like a year and a half. It got big and I started just getting antsy. Like I love the idea of doing all the things. I hate the idea of just being the CX person. When I started at Ollipop, it was like, you can jump in on the retention side. We built subscription from like 1,000 subscribers to 10,000 subscribers. So like it was so much of my work was subscription and retention and CX. And suddenly it's like, Eli, you're great at CX. Just hang tight in that corner. And that made me I just couldn't handle that. I just love early stage doing everything. I remember at that point, one of my senior leaders was like, Eli, the idea that you can just jump ship because a company's getting too big is crazy. Like you can't just jump just because of the size. And I was like, well, watch me. I have nothing. Like I have no equity. I have nothing holding me here. It's a great company, great job, but like this is 40, 50, 60 hours a week. I want it to be fun. Getting too comfortable also with like a non-traditional background, the idea of like generally go to college, get a degree, do the thing you're good at wasn't prevalent in my mind, right? Like I didn't have a college degree. I didn't have a traditional route. So for me, it was like, I'm going to learn as much as I can and then I'll just jump. And now, 10 years later, 7 years later, 6 years later, it's like, it's finally clocking to me that that's maybe not the smartest way to learn, but as somebody that's on their own, just learning, I just want to learn. So Ollipop 2 years, a little under 2 years, jumped into Jones Road Beauty through a friend. I got connected to somebody on Twitter. His name was Cody. We got on a call. Turns out it's his mom's company. We become good friends. A couple of months later, he brings me on to do customer experience and retention. And again, like number 16, the company was probably doing like 40, 50, 60 million year two. The business doubled year 3, year 4. And it just was like, again, kind of like 75 employees. I was getting a little antsy, a little under 2 years in, where I was like, okay, I love customer experience. I love retention, but what they need from me is much more than I am willing to go in terms of like retention is twofold. There's the art and the science. And I felt like I was always better at the art than the science. And the science to me is the incrementality testing, the spreadsheets, all that stuff that I didn't want to do. And in my universe, it's like, okay, let me find somebody or let me find an AI tool or something that I can query to ask the questions without actually doing the work. But that wasn't where growth was demanded from me as a leader. And I figured, okay, what do I do now? I started building a newsletter. The newsletter is driving more revenue than my job. And I was like, I don't need to work. So if I don't need to work, what do I want from a job? And that was like a quarter life crisis that had less to do with Jones, more to do with me as like a leader, but as an employee, as a kid, right? Like I'm not 60. And I realized that the three things that matter are I want to have fun, which feels like boomers hate when you say that, right? Like a job shouldn't be fun, but I love having fun at my job. I love when it feels exciting, even if it's not 90% of the time, but it should have an element of fun. Number 2, I want to be challenged. Like I want to be the dumbest person in the room. And number 3, like I want a really hard problem to solve. And Jones was doing so well that with or without me, they'd crush. And that for most people is like, that's amazing. Company's crushing. For me, that's like existentialism. Like, what am I here for? What value am I adding? Yotpo sponsors the newsletter. I am like, wait, I've turned Yotpo 3 times. I hated them for so many reasons. And now I'm seeing that they're entirely different than what I remember them. I remember them being like an overpriced review software. And now they're like loyalty and they have a platform and they're thinking about RFM and email and SMS. And I had a quick conversation with the CEO because a bunch of people told me, like, talk to this guy. He'll be able to help you understand yourself and where you want to go next. He's hired 1,000+ people. He gets it. And within 5 minutes of talking to him with no intention of ever touching SaaS, he says, like, you're an entrepreneur without the risk tolerance. And I said, yeah, that's 100% fair. Like, I love building. I hate like not having a salary. And he was like, I can see a universe where you come into Yotpo and bring all the knowledge and like all the data that you have on the brand side and help us build something better. And the title will come up with, the salary we'll figure out. And at that point in my life, I'm like less excited about the salary, less excited about the title. I want a really fun challenge. So in that quarter life crisis moment, I said, you know what? Screw it. I guess I'm going to SaaS. So mission number 1, delete all the nasty tweets about Yotpo, which was quite a feat. And mission number 2 is like put myself in between. Like, if you want to hate Yotpo, you have to hate me now. And it's less exciting to hate me than it is to hate Yotpo. And I tried to bring myself as the person. So if you have a problem with Yotpo, I'm here to help you. If you have feedback, I'm here to help you. So pulling from my CX background on like deeply listening and deeply understanding, pulling from my retention background on what does it take to build a product that people genuinely like and enjoy and not have to fight for getting out of a contract. And then the rest is just like brand marketing that I'm trying to teach myself.
Gotcha. Yeah, fighting to get out of a contract. Kind of going through a bit of that right now. But one thing you touched on that was really interesting to me. So you said that you were learning a lot kind of by this job jumping. But you said that you didn't think that this was the fastest way to learn. So, or the smartest way to learn. So what would you say for someone who's in their early career, they're in a very similar position to you. They have this sort of entrepreneurial mindset. They want to learn more. They want to solve hard problems. They don't like when things get like where they're not needed. What would you say to them is probably the smartest way to learn?
I think a few things. I think on like I've gotten to a point where I can hold two truths in my head equally. On one hand, like, yes, it's not great for your career to be the person, like when an HR person sees your resume and sees that every year and a half you hop, that's not a great look, because if they're hiring you for this role, what's to say you're not going to jump in a year and a half? So I hold that truth in my brain. The other truth I hold in my brain is you are your brand and you are yourself, and you deeply understand what's best for you. And I think gut is a combination of like childhood trauma and street smarts, and your gut tells you when it's I've spent 4 years at a company and then 6 weeks at the next. And now looking back, it was definitely the right decision to jump when I jumped. But my brain at that point was telling me, like, you spent 4 years, why are you jumping after 6 weeks? So I think you really have to hold both truths, that yes, it's important to see like what the outside world is looking at. And two, it's like, yes, you know when the right time is to jump. And sometimes it's just a matter of being lazy and just kind of like, yeah, it's kind of safe, it's kind of okay. But realistically, internally, is this the right move or is this the wrong move? I will say, like, on the practical side, like, how does it mess you up when you jump a job every 2 years? The answer is it does. Like, HR people hate me. Like, I'm not HR's best friend. Like, if they see my titles, they see my jumping, they see like HR wants to see somebody that spent a good amount of time at great brands, goes through the career ladder. None of my jobs I've gotten ever in my life came from HR. Like, none of them came from applying. My first luggage job was a friend of a friend that knew somebody at the luggage company that just needed someone that speaks English just to respond to emails. Ollipop was like, they already near hiring somebody, but a friend of a friend vouched for me. Jones Road Beauty was a friend I made on Twitter. Yotpo was like, I became friends with the CEO, which again is like, these are not the traditional ways, but I think I've gotten to a point in my career where I understand that the consequences of my actions are that an HR professional, a headhunter, won't jump into my LinkedIn messages and say like, hey, can we hire you? I'm not that cookie cutter person. And I think I've learned enough, now I can be riskier, because now I have the important brands under your belt. So what I tell people is generally like the first 3 jobs in your career, take the safe bets, go to college. Like, if I had a choice, I would have gone to college. Like, I didn't go to college because I was like 20 something and I had no way to pay for it and would have to start by finishing high school, which I did in my 20s. Like, that wasn't it wasn't practical, but I say, go to college, get a job at an important brand. So I say, like, if you can maybe make $10,000 less, if you can, go to the job that's the Ollipop and not just the tiny little mom and pop shop that's going to pay you $1,000 more, because brand recognition really matters. Like, Ollipop was such an important piece on my resume that now it's a key that opens up so many more doors than I ever thought. And again, back then, Ollipop wasn't Ollipop. It was a bet I took. But Jones Road was another calculated bet. Like, this gives me another kind of like tile in my whatever analogy is like, it gives me another kind of like another square in my folder of like, this is now a celebrity bootstrap brand that I was able to spend time at. And I spent time at the venture backed kind of like it soda brands. And then I spent time on the SaaS side. And I think most career professionals would tell you, okay, you get good at something, just do that one thing. But for me, I think I like hard things, because if not, I feel like an imposter. If not, I feel like if like I don't do the hard thing, I feel like you're just kind of chickening out. You're just kind of taking the easy route. So I like hard things, but also I feel like I read Range, the famous Range by David Epstein book, and I was like, oh, this is so me. And then I couldn't get a job for 4 years after reading it, because like I was a generalist, and nobody wants a generalist at a large company. And again, I think my biggest problem is I'm a generalist. So Ollipop didn't want a generalist. They wanted it at the beginning. A year and a half later, they're like, no, you're a CX guy. Jones Road loved that I had two things that I knew super well, but at some point they're like, this is your lane, and you need to get really good at it. So being a generalist kind of screwed me, but I think it's like range. The idea of range is up to a certain point, or at a certain point in your career. When you're starting a company, it's great to be a generalist, because you can get almost everything from 0 to 1. And then you can like find the co-founder, find the hire. But when you're like a mid-level executive, being a generalist is a path to terrible life, because most people don't want to hire a generalist. Now on the Yotpo side, like the fun part about Yotpo is, on one hand, it's a very large company. On the other hand, it's like a very, very evolving company. And there's always kind of the things that fall through the cracks that now I can pick up. And that's like the impactful when you get to a point where you're the person that picks up the things that fall through the cracks. That's a fun place to be, but very few companies are looking to hire a role like that.
Yeah. You mentioned something a second ago about kind of going for the bigger brand instead of pursuing money. And the story you were telling about your early life sounded like several times you made the decision to pursue your dreams, or pursue travel, or pursue fun instead of chasing money. So I think this gets harder as people get more money. But I'm curious as to kind of what your experience was. It seems like that's worked out, but I'm interested to hear kind of your take on that.
This is like this is the first time I think I've ever shared this on a podcast or publicly. But I think two things for me that were interesting is, number one, I grew up in a family where when I was like 0 till 6 years old, my grandparents had a lot of money. And when I was 6, they lost it all, or 7. And that has an effect on a kid, where it's like you suddenly, everything you ask for, you get, to learning what budget means, right? Like when my parents, I'm 7 and I'm 8, and my parents are like, that's not in the budget. And I was like, I don't even know what that means. That's crazy. And me and my older brother are both the same age. He's a year and a bit older than me. He became like a ruthless saver, and very, very kind of on top. Like he was the chipmunk holding the acorns. And he eventually became a big time lawyer, and somehow without a high school diploma or a college degree, got into Columbia Law and went to work at the #1 law firm. And I was completely different, where I was the hustler that, like, my grandfather had a food company, and I would buy wafers, like these chocolate wafers from him at wholesale, and then sell them in school to make like 50 cents each. And I was always a hustler trying to like figure it out. So I think a lot of my early adulthood was just calibrated towards like, how can I, A, not be stressed about money, B, I hated the idea of being told what to do. And those two things pulled very, very hard at me. Like on one hand, I would spend 2 years traveling and doing nothing because I didn't want to be told what to do. On the other hand, I really needed money to feel safe. And I think that like friction took me to a place where at some point in my 20s, when I met my wife and we got married, and I finally feel like, no, now I really have to get my shit together. At some point it clicked, where I was like, okay, I really need to figure out how to make money. And CX, I get into the CX world, and it's like the average salary is 60K, 50K, 35K. If you're making big money, you're at 90. And then I learned that if you're in the top 1 or top 5 or top 10% of CX professionals, you can be making 300. Like the SVP of CX at whatever Fortune 500 brand is making a couple $100,000. And then I was like, okay, I can either become like an operations or a growth guy, or I can deeply, deeply, deeply learn CX and figure out my niche to become in the top 5 or top 1% of like direct consumer CX. And this is like 2020, 2021 when Ollipop is popping off. And I tell myself, okay, like this is the time to lock in. And if you can build an audience around yourself, if you can kind of like clear out all the like, oh shit, what happens if I go broke? Like get past that point, then you'll be able to think normally again. And for me, like a combination of my child and a combination of what my adult self wanted, like the inner child and current adult self, brought me to a point where it's like, okay, yes, I want money, but only because of the safety. So as a kid, you tell yourself you want to be a billionaire or you want to be a millionaire. And then as an adult, you realize that there's a number. And somebody super smart told me this 2 years ago. He's like, figure out what that number is, where once you're past that, you don't care anymore. And it's generally for most people, it's not as high as you think it is. Yes, it's a lot of money. It could be a $2, $3, $400,000. It's not 10 million. And I think once I hit that number from the salary, from the side gig, from the consulting, from the newsletter, whatever, that's what broke me. So suddenly it's like I'm making that money. My wife is going through med school and I'm able to pay for her med school tuition in cash. And I'm just like, that's amazing. But now what? And I think because my number is not as high as people think and less than most people, it just brought me to this midlife crisis where I was like, okay, now the money thing is figured out. I feel like I can choose whatever job I want. Both sides of the friction of the push and pull are exactly where they are. I figured out the money. I figured out the kind of like hate being told what to do. Here's a job to get. And I'm kind of miserable. And that's when I realized that I just need to do harder things. And harder to me, like there are two things. There's harder of like getting really good at spreadsheets. And then there's harder directionally, the things that you're excited to do harder. And that was one thing I learned about myself is like, I can go my whole career and never know how to like VLOOKUP. And I'm good with that. Like I could never know how to incrementality test and I'm good with that. But that's not what this job needs from me. So I can either kind of fight with that friction of like, they want me to be something that I can be, but I don't really enjoy. Or do I find a job that is looking for exactly what I am and where I want to go? And that's like that's like the dream. The dream is finding a job that wants exactly what you are plus 30, 40% growth. Because you don't have to be anything else. You just have to get really, really good at that. And I think I'm blessed that I'm like probably 10, 15 years in my career and I found that so many times over, like the job that demands exactly what you need plus 20, plus 30, plus 40%. Because if you don't have the plus 40%, you just cruise and you become really, really lackluster and you never learn anything. And Yotpo has been that for me, where on one hand, it's like, it's a very, very big challenge. Like a business I've never been a business this size. I've never been a business that has done things that some brands didn't like, right? Like there are brands that used them 8 years ago and hated that they kept charging more and more for reviews. How do you win back trust in an industry this small? Like, how do you get back somebody that used us 8 years ago and hated us, that has said a bunch of nasty things? Well, we've been able to do that over time, like become friends with these people, show them how we've evolved, and we brought some of those people back. Now, how do you build a business that's consistently being competed with at every realm, right? Like there are ankle biters in every part of the industry. How do you stay relevant? How do you stay focused? Like these are the hardest things, but they're hard in the realm of things that I'm excited about. And I think 1% of the world gets to do hard in the realm of excitement and everyone else just eats shit or doesn't get paid, which are both terrible.
What kind of skills do you feel like you need to learn to be in that sort of top echelon of performers?
I think EQ, which is like so important, but it's like hard to teach. There are a million books of like how to teach EQ. Trust me, if those books all worked, we'd have a lot more EQ than IQ, but we don't. And I think society generally overpays and over prefers IQ over EQ. But as somebody that's worked with some of the smartest people I've ever met, like every business, Ollipop, Jones Road, Yotpo, like these are insanely smart people. I would put myself as like half as smart as these people. I don't think I'm very smart on the IQ lens. The value that I can bring on the EQ side, and again, like depending on the brand, some brands lean into it more than others, right? Like Ollipop was a very soft, emotional, high EQ brand. So they leaned into it more of the surprise and delight, et cetera. So some brands lean into that more, but I think EQ is number one. And part of EQ is really like deeply understanding yourself and your own strengths, because most people I talk to that are like, oh, I'm early in my career. Should I take the job at MailChimp or at like Intel? And it's like, that's not the question. The question is, what's the job? What's the culture like? And I don't say culture as like a softie. I say culture as like, if you're not in the right culture for yourself, you're just going to be a very stupid employee. Like you're just going to be a very lame employee. Nobody wants to work at a company that doesn't bring the value that they can bring, that helps them bring the value they can bring. So I think EQ, I think really good at self-reflection, like to better understand like what are like, what's the quadrant of like the thing I'm excited about, and the thing, and there's like a bunch of like, it's the Japanese thing called ikigai, whatever. Like putting all the Japanese stuff aside, I don't think this is like a Buddhist. I view this as an intellect. Like I think those two things of like, what am I reasonably good at, and what am I excited to get better at? I think if those two things were overlapped more for people, they would work. And the hardest part is like sometimes you're a customer experience associate and you really deeply like product development. That's like a very hard bridge to cross. Now, how do you cross that? Is like, and I talk to people, I spoke to somebody yesterday. She's a customer experience associate. She wants to jump into product development. How do you tell that person very politely, this is going to be a very hard bridge? Well, what you could do is at your current job, you can ask to help the product development team. You can lean into like customer issues around product development. You can be the cross between product development and customer experience and learn as much as you can. And then slowly ask them if you can I be like a product development associate as well on the side? Because it's easier to change, to grab that as your full-time job than to apply to a new one, and then take that and put it in your resume and try to get a job. But that's the hard part. And some people learn that 30 years in their career, they're like, I absolutely hate what I do. Like I went to accounting school, I'm a CPA, I hate numbers.
Yeah, that's very unfortunate.
Yeah.
You mentioned one thing about society paying better for IQ. Totally agreed. I would say that people are disproportionately fired due to EQ, in my experience. Like I think, gosh, I hate to put a number on it, but like probably 3/4 of the people I've ever fired has been due to EQ, not IQ. Like it's been due to failures of communication or, well, gosh, I mean that's pretty much most of it. The people who just can't communicate well. That just really grinds my gears.
But it feels like it's barely reflected in hiring processes. It's like hiring processes are mostly IQ, right? It's like do this case study, do this whatever, like show us your code. And it's barely ever like, how do you handle, like something we used to do on the CX side was EQ stuff. Like on the CX side, I would send like, these are 3 examples of customer emails, and I just want to see how you'd respond. And I don't care about your style, the way you write is interesting to me, but it's less like, are you going to blame the person? Are you going to say we, but not I? Like, are you going to take zero accountability and just say we as a company don't give a shit, right? Like, how do you handle, and less about like, what's your response time? Can you give me stats from your old job? Like teaching somebody to move quickly or like pick up a new tool, like all those are easy. Teaching somebody how to like use good judgment. And obviously CX is different than a meta growth guy job. But I think every job demands, like, even if you're an executive, unless you're Elon Musk and you can get away with whatever chaos, most executives need to have decently high EQ. Like, how do you fire people? How do you hire people? How do you celebrate wins? How do you walk through losses? Like, I think that's like a very, very EQ heavy role, but we just barely ever screen for it. I do think a lot of CEOs get to where they are because they have EQ. So there's that, right? Like at some point you get like screened out if you're like completely on a spectrum. You get like screened out because people want to work with people that have EQ. Like people want to work with people that get them, and they don't want to work with psychopaths. So at some point you get screened out, but it's never like in an interview process.
Yeah. I think probably as like people move up the ladder, EQ probably becomes more important, I would say. And I feel like I'm actually a little bit infamous in my company for, I only hire based on one interview, and I will just talk, and that's the whole interview. And it usually takes 30 minutes. And I feel like I have a good enough read on someone after 30 minutes that I can pretty much sell. And
I would lie if I say I don't do the same.
Yeah,
but I think we're very rare. Yeah.
Right. Agreed. But it's worked out for me so far. Like I've absolutely hired some superstars who are way smarter than I am, who are just fantastic, and they've moved up the ranks, and that's been really cool. I would like to talk. So now you're doing branding. What excites you in branding right now?
So I think marketing SaaS is an absolute nightmare. Like I think very few people do it well. It's just like on the SaaS side, I think there's a few things. You can talk about like social proof, right? Like the case studies, the brands you work with, not super interesting. You can talk about the value that your tool brings. Again, kind of boring, right? Like besides like Cluey, like besides like the kind of like the very current, like the chat GPTs of the world can just show a workflow and be like, your life just changed, right? There are some SaaS tools that are really easy to market. most SaaS tools are like, we will make your competitive research 3 times easier. That's like boring. So you start on the outcomes. You're like, you'll be able to sleep better at night. Too far, right? You'll be able to like get to your lunch faster. Also too far. So you kind of balance between like the boring, very, very generic. These are the brands that use the tool to like where you can get the kind of like end goal of what happens after you use the tool. And I think most SaaS vendors are in that prism, right? It's either like use this tool, 10,000 other brands use it, or kind of like will change your life. Yotpo is so different because Yotpo has kind of gone through so many evolutions. It's 13 plus years old. I've never worked for a brand that's been around. Like all of the brands I've worked with were like 2 years old, a year in, 2.5 years in, where there's not a lot of baggage. And Yotpo has like on one hand, you have 25,000 plus incredible brands, like from Barnes and Noble to IKEA to like legendary brands that use it and love it, to mom and pop shops that are doing $1,000 a year using it on a free plan. But you also have like quite a few brands 6, 7, 8 years ago that have had like a not great experience, that signed a contract and then 2 weeks later decided, don't like contracts. And then we're told that they can't leave a contract, which again, sidebar, I think is very funny because you don't do that with your car lease, right? Like when you sign a 2-year lease, you're stuck with the car. You don't do that with your house. For some reason, SaaS people feel like, I felt this way on the brand side. I never tried to get out of a contract unless you have like a crazy good reason, just because finding better pricing is not a reason to try to get out of a 2-year contract. And the reason why contracts are created is because SaaS companies need to hire support and CS. And like, there's a model that goes into this pricing, not because Brian decided he's sick of Yotpo, which is like a separate rant. But I think like as you start kind of like learning about the history that people have, and I get it because like I left Yotpo too, I get it. That's the hard part on like on a brand level. It's like, how do you hold both of those truths? One, people love this tool. 2, people have baggage with this tool. And how do you bring those people together and take Yotpo kind of like to 2.0 to 3.0 to the future?
How are you doing that?
I think a lot of it has been, from my perspective, has been listening. Like I think Yotpo has been like a large company that just operated well, but there hasn't been enough of like just getting down and listening to people that have been through whatever. So our CEO in the last year and a half has spoken to hundreds of customers, of agencies. I mean, it's like a couple hours a week is doing that, is like listening, and not just like a listening tour and you post a photo and you're done, but it's like dinners and agency days. And I mean, like he's met hundreds of customers, both current and past, and sit with them, better understand where we messed up, better understand what we can learn. So I think a lot of those are the things that don't scale, the advisory boards, the kind of like sitting in person, discussing the future of Yotpo. And then on the scalable side, it's like, how do we continue just testing things and seeing what resonates, especially on product marketing, right? It's like testing, learning, iterating, like the more like mass and fast moving versus like the boring and difficult stuff.
And for the scalable stuff, I'm curious, what say metrics are you tracking as far as marketing? What stuff's worth listening to, not worth listening to? I know you said you're not really a spreadsheet guy, so we can skip if you need to. But
yeah, tough question. No, I'll say a couple of things like on the Yotpo side. On the marketing side, like I'd say 2 things. A is the basic, like how many leads are we driving? MQLs, SQLs, all that fun stuff. Like what is marketing accomplishing in terms of driving demand, right? Which is the ultimate goal of marketing. I was reading something today that's like, somebody was like, there's no middle of funnel, right? It's either top of funnel, no intent, or intent, bottom of the funnel. And I think like something that, which is like, it's like a hot take. It doesn't have to be true, right? It's like one of those things where people just say stuff to get a couple of likes. But the thing that I found valuable with that is like, from a marketing perspective, it's either it's working or it's not. And the difference between the brand stuff and the stuff I touch on, the advocacy on the events, is the funnel is longer. But at some point, daddy needs to get paid. At some point, the company has to make money. And I think like that's where, we go towards like the SQLs, the MQLs. A lot of like the ABM, like account-based marketing motion we're running now is like iterating and testing new outbounding, new outreach, and trying to better understand like what can we learn on the upcoming renewal dates, on what tools they have, how they choose those tools. And we're using a lot of AI to kind of like build towards that. But that's again, like how many leads are we getting? On the like soft brand stuff, we haven't done a ton of like I feel like most of these are fluff. Like, yes, we track social mentions, and yes, we track, are they positive or negative, et cetera. But Nothing crazy there.
And how much are you guys tracking ROI on your marketing efforts? Like, is there a room for art, or is it all science whole way down?
It depends who you ask.
Yeah.
I feel like we need more. I feel like we need more art. Currently, I'd say it's more science. Like it's very much an attribution model, and we don't invest in things that don't pay us. And there are things that I've gotten away with, given my job and given like the EQ softness part of my role. There are definitely things that I get away with senior leadership being, we know that this will work. Like we know having the CEO talk to people that hated Yotpo to hear them out and explain what we've changed, there's no way that doesn't work. So yes, if he's taking hours of his week doing that, I'm not looking for an ROI on that tomorrow. But for the most part, like any heavy spending, any like large brand campaigns, yes, we're certainly tracking, pipeline. Like there's no sugarcoating it. Like we will extend that visibility window a little bit if we're feeling a certain kind of way. But I think it also depends on like where you're at profitability wise, how much you raised, how much you're spending. Like I think it's also ultimately a math example, right? If a business raises $100 million and is growing 10x year over year, it's a very different, to write off $1 million for brand is much easier than businesses that are striving to get profitable and don't want to raise as much. So I'd say it's brand dependent. Yeah.
Yeah. And as far as that sort of lack of art, so I feel like this, like if I could average out everyone who's in a marketing position, I would say more than half are probably in like the more science and art side. I'm curious as to your thoughts for Yotpo in particular. So do you feel like the lack of art is that due to business culture, or is that more due to business size? Context on this question is I feel like as I've seen businesses grow and I've been in them, it's almost always gone from art to science. And it's almost like, depending on where your business is at, like if you're on the smaller side, there's no room for the science because you don't have tracking in place. You don't know what campaigns work and so on. But as you're bigger, there's no room, or not no room, but there's very little room for the art of marketing. It's all ROI, pipeline gen, MQLs, SQLs, sales, all of that. So I'm just curious your thoughts.
It's a very good observation. And again, like coming from somebody that hasn't done Yotpo's the only SaaS company I've worked at, but I do write the newsletter every day for the last 3 years. All of that sponsored by SaaS companies. So I've worked with probably 50, 60 SaaS companies, and you see all of them asking different questions, right? It's a newsletter. What should you be asking? How many clicks? How many opens? But then you see like certain ones will ask like, okay, of the clicks, how many clicks are on the ad read? Of the opens, and what percentage of and so many of, so many just don't ask any questions. They just view this as like, I know that you have X amount of subscribers that are in this world. And if they read it, that's like reading a billboard. And I hope and pray that they see my name 5 times at some point, it'll work. And some of them will try to triangulate, like the middle is like triangulating that, hey, I signed 3 clients and 3 of them mentioned your name, right? So it's like triangulating a little bit. Yes, they clicked on the meta ad, but they have definitely seen it in the newsletter versus, the extreme is like, I want to know exactly how many clicks. And I'd say like, more than half of people that I talk to are closer to art than science on newsletters in particular. But a lot of the brands that are looking at newsletters are not even looking at it because they don't believe that's like straight demand pipeline generation. But on the size piece, like the only caveat is like HubSpot's plastering trains and billboards. So like I think there are some like very large brands that definitely do write off X amount of dollars. Like I can't imagine that HubSpot is tracking pipeline generation from like wrapping the Q train. I might be wrong. Like maybe there's like a special, link that you can use on the Q train X, Y, and Z. But
my guess is they're tracking, say, like branded search, something like that.
Possibly. I think I will say like my 2 cents is it's more business culture than it is size. But again, like it also ebbs and flows. Like I think Yotpo has gone from like only pipe to now kind of like a much better understanding the soft parts of the funnel within reason, right? Like my cart stops working at some point, but within reason. Like I think my budget is like a fraction of what we pay on spend and what we within reason. But I think it's business culture. But again, like small startups will raise $10 million and they'll do a whole merch line and they'll fly a bunch of influencers to God knows what. Like we see on, I think it's more about like how much money they have liquid and what the timeline is that they need to show reasonable ROI until the wallets get squeezed.
Yeah. I am curious. So in your position running branding, how like aware and tracking do you have to be of overall business objectives like churn or like if there's like a desired profit? I don't know if you guys are profitable, but if there's like a desired profit margin or something like that, or are they just like, here's your marketing budget, like just go spend it?
I say like my role is a weird one because the way people feel about Yotpo brand advocacy is something I spend time on, but I also spend a bunch of time on go to market, better understanding the motion there, and trying to support ABM, trying to support events. So I think because my role is so fluid and holistic, my role generally changes at least once a quarter. And what that means is not my full scope, but like half of my scope will stay the same quarter over quarter, and the rest will things come, things go. Because of that, I have like a general awareness around like, yeah, the important wins, the important churns, where our numbers are at. Can I tell you day to day like what? Yes, but I'd have a general understanding of what our pipe looks like, what our churn numbers look like by product. Have a very deep understanding of competitive landscape. So I lean very deep in that. Like, why are people choosing X over Y? Like, I have a very strong point of view on almost all of our competitors from being in that seat where I had to choose Yotpo over X, Y, and Z. But I'd say like it like anyone that touches any brand is generally like fluffy billboard stuff. You know.
Gotcha. And then I think kind of the last thing I want to touch, I know we're running out of time, but I'm curious as to your thoughts is if there are any benefits from going from the retention and customer side to the marketing side. Like, have any of those skills carried over, or have they made you like better on the branding side, or is it like kind of a wash?
It's a good question. I think two things. So number one, the value of being brand side and joining a SaaS company that's targeting your exact persona is very helpful. So I think that the value that I bring is like, if you want to know how a pitch resonates, just pitch it to me and I'll be brutally honest. Like, I think I'm Yotpo's like most pessimistic Debbie Downer internally. Like I'm the hardest on Yotpo because I know what people don't like about Yotpo. So when you pitch something to me, I'll say like, this is why people hate us. Like, stop saying that. But so I think that's the value I bring. The value I get is, I think when you think about a business this size with AOV that's not $25, right? This is not a contract. This is not like selling supplements on Amazon. And you learn a lot about really deeply understanding what a funnel looks like. So I think, yes, most brands think everything's kind of like a direct response, like somebody's surfing YouTube and they just so happen to really deeply desire a supplement, a biotin supplement today. And if I give that craft the perfect message they're buying today, and we tell ourselves that from the brand side, that if the copy is so good and if the creative is so good, all I need is that one click. And that's the fault of Meta. That's the fault of like all these attribution tools, is like they want you to think that one ad is the thing that's like, no, you got them through the funnel and this is the ad they clicked on, when in reality is a lot of things you can't track. With SaaS, you see that every single day. Like, there's no way that somebody signs a $6,000 or $12,000 Yotpo contract because they happen to have seen your ad on Meta. Like, there's no way. And obviously the people that run the ads will say that. And obviously the person that the BDR that outreach 2 weeks ago will say it's 100% them. But that's the value that it brings to the brand side, is you start really understanding what a timeline could look like, and how these tools almost always kind of direct you towards thinking it's an easy win. But
So true. Hear that every day, the attribution problem. So
yes. Yeah.
Oh, well, but I know we're running out of time here. So any last thoughts that you'd like to share with listeners, or anything else that I should ask you, but I didn't know to?
Yeah. I mean, I think, the thing that's on my mind lately is nobody knows you as well as you know yourself. And I think almost 4 or 5 times a week, I'll get questions of, what do I do next? And almost nobody can answer that other than yourself. And most people just don't believe in their gut enough. Maybe some people believe too much in their gut, but I don't think that's generally the problem. People don't like, just lean in. If you're feeling like the job is over, it might be over. That doesn't mean you have to quit tomorrow. It means you can start looking. If you feel like you can do better, you don't need your boss to tell you can do better. You know what that feels like when you're just giving 20%. And it's something I'm telling myself lately as well, is like I feel like I just almost never been wrong when my gut gives me a weird feeling about something, at work or beyond. But I think at work it's super relevant now. It's like companies are hiring, companies are firing. I mean, times are weird with AI, and just dive in. Like if you feel like AI can help you, just jump in and learn, because if not, somebody else will, and they'll do your job in half the time and you'll get fired in 6 months. So just like, just jump in. Um, Something I definitely need to hear myself often, is like trust your gut more and lean in, because it's going to be a crazy ride.
So true. Maybe I needed to hear that myself, the trust your gut side. So Eli, thanks so much. If people want to learn more about you, what you're doing, where should they go?
Yes. So Yotpo is yotpo.com, yotpo.com. I'm Eli Weiss. So you can find me on Twitter, LinkedIn, newsletter, Eli Weiss. There's almost always an extra S because Eli Weiss is just a common name. So ELIWEISSS.com. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. Thanks for being here. See you guys.